They told me to sit down and shut up. At my own husband's estate dinner, no less. Said I was just the widow, as if decades of building, nurturing, and sacrificing simply vanished with a title. I ironed my blouse twice that day, checked my lipstick 3 times, and silently vowed not to cry. This was just dinner, I told myself. Just my family. The very people I'd loved and raised for over 4 decades. We were at my son Blake's lavish home, the one Henry and I co-signed for a detail. Of course, no one ever bothered to remember. I brought a blueberry pie, hoping to soften the air, but the silence that greeted me was colder than any winter night. They talked around me, not to me, their words sharp, their dismissals casual. Little did they know their careless words were chiseling away something far more fragile than my pride. They thought they were holding a meeting to decide my future. Oh, how wrong they were. What happened next wasn't a storm. It was a consequence they themselves had written, and it would change everything forever. Stay with me, because this story isn't just about what they lost, it's about what I finally found. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. For 68 years, I've worn many hats: daughter, wife, mother, entrepreneur, and, as of 6 months ago, a widow. But on that particular evening, in my son Blake's gleaming minimalist mansion, I was apparently reduced to just one: the widow. It's funny how a single word can strip away your entire identity, as if the life you've lived, the battles you've fought, and the foundations you've laid simply evaporate the moment your husband takes his last breath. I arrived precisely on time, as Henry had always taught me. Punctuality was a virtue, a sign of respect. I clutched my famous blueberry pie, its comforting warmth a stark contrast to the chill that greeted me. No one rushed to the door, no warm embrace, no "Mother, we're so glad you're here," just the distant hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. It felt less like a family gathering and more like an exclusive club meeting where I hadn't been invited. My son Blake, a sharp-suited man with Henry's piercing blue eyes but none of his warmth, was engrossed in a discussion with my daughter-in-law, Candace, and my 2 grandchildren, Emily and Mark. They were all impeccably dressed, their laughter echoing through the high ceilings. I saw them glance my way, a fleeting nod from Emily, a quick, dismissive wave from Blake, and then they were back to their conversation. It wasn't overt rudeness. It was something far more insidious. It was the quiet, confident assurance of people who believe you no longer matter. This wasn't new, of course. Since Henry passed, a subtle shift had occurred. Conversations would stop when I entered a room. Decisions about family matters were made without my input, only relayed to me as faits accomplis. My opinions, once sought after, were now treated as quaint anecdotes, or worse, ignored altogether. I became the polite fixture, the background noise at my own family's events. This phenomenon isn't unique to my story. It's a silent epidemic many older women face, especially widows. We spend our lives nurturing, building, holding families together, often in ways that are invisible until they're gone. We are the silent architects, the financial strategists behind the scenes, the emotional pillars. Yet once the perceived head of the household is gone, society, and tragically often our own families, relegate us to the periphery. Our wisdom is seen as outdated, our experiences irrelevant, our voices softened to whispers. I remember reading about a study that found older adults, particularly women, are often perceived as less competent and less capable after their partners pass away, regardless of their actual abilities or prior contributions. It's a subconscious bias, a societal narrative that subtly undermines the incredible strength and resilience that often comes with age. I had always dismissed such notions, confident in my own abilities. But that evening, I felt the cold grip of that perception firsthand. I found a seat at the far end of the impossibly long dining table, a place typically reserved for guests of lesser importance. The table was laden with gourmet dishes: roasted lamb, asparagus, artisanal bread, a far cry from the canned soup Henry and I used to eat for lunch for 20 years straight, skipping vacations to save every dime. We built all of this, brick by painstaking brick. Every penny that funded Blake's elaborate life, every luxurious detail in this house, had its roots in the hard work and sacrifice Henry and I made. I wasn't just a wife, I was a partner, an equal, often the driving force behind our financial successes. I managed the books, invested wisely, and navigated market fluctuations while Henry focused on his business operations. We were a team, a true partnership. Yet no one acknowledged that. The conversation flowed around me, a babble of stock market trends, vacation plans, and anecdotes about their children's latest achievements. Emily, my granddaughter, was talking animatedly about her upcoming trip to Europe. Mark, her brother, was discussing his latest venture. They were Henry's grandchildren, yes, but they were also mine. I'd spent countless hours teaching them, guiding them, celebrating their triumphs, and soothing their hurts. But tonight, I was invisible. Then came the moment. Blake, finally acknowledging my presence, albeit dismissively, cleared his throat. "Now, Mother," he began, his voice laced with forced patience, "we need to discuss the estate. We've decided it's best if we handle most of the details. You don't need to worry your head about any of it." My blood ran cold. Worry my head, I thought. I'd spent decades worrying my head, making shrewd decisions, building an empire that supported all of them. This wasn't about worrying my head. This was about control. This was about subtly, yet firmly, pushing me out of the picture. Candace, ever the elegant enabler, chimed in, "Yes, Eleanor, we just want you to relax. You've done so much. Now it's our turn to take care of things." Her words, though seemingly kind, felt like velvet chains. They were polite, but their underlying message was clear. You are old, you are weak, and you are no longer capable of handling your own affairs. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the one that used to signal my own attempts to shrink myself, to make myself smaller and less imposing so that others could feel bigger. I had spent so much of my life doing that for Henry, for the children, for the sake of peace. But tonight something shifted. A tiny spark, long dormant, began to glow. I looked at each of them, truly looked. Blake with his entitled smirk, Candace with her practiced smile, even Emily and Mark, lost in their own world, seemingly unaware of the casual disrespect permeating the air. It was a tableau of generational disconnect, a stark reminder that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who truly fail to see us. And then Blake uttered the words that sealed their fate, words that would echo in their ears long after that night. "You're just the widow, Mother. You should sit quietly and let us handle this." Just the widow? The words hit me like a physical blow, yet they also served as a catalyst. They ignited a fire within me, a fire that had been smoldering under years of unspoken slights and undervalued contributions. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just dinner. This was a battle. And I was about to fight it on my own terms. The silence that followed his words wasn't awkward, it was charged. It was the calm before the storm. Though they were too self-absorbed to notice, what they saw was a quiet, defeated old woman. What I felt was a surge of clarity, a profound realization that the time for silence was over. My quiet departure was not an act of surrender. It was the first strategic move in a game they didn't even know they were playing. Just the widow. The words hung in the air, a final stinging declaration. For a lifetime, I had been the glue, the planner, the silent force behind the scenes. I had navigated market crashes, comforted sleepless children, celebrated triumphs, and mourned losses. I had built, sacrificed, and nurtured. And now I was just the widow, relegated to the sidelines, stripped of my agency, deemed irrelevant. But in that very moment, a shift occurred. The ache in my chest didn't disappear, but it transformed. It wasn't the pain of being diminished, it was the sharp, exhilarating sting of clarity. I remember thinking, they truly see me as nothing more than a relic. And that realization, ironically, was liberating. When people underestimate you to that degree, they leave themselves wide open to surprise. And oh, what a surprise I had in store. I set my glass down on the polished mahogany table, the gentle clink echoing slightly in the sudden quiet. Blake had opened his mouth again, probably to add another dismissive remark, but I didn't wait. My movements were slow, deliberate. Every fiber of my being wanted to stand up abruptly, to yell, to unleash years of pent-up frustration. But that wasn't my way. That wasn't how you won. You won by being precise, by being intentional. I stood up, not with a flourish, but with the quiet dignity that had always been my hallmark. My gaze swept across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on each face. Blake, with his perfectly sculpted hair and an air of untouchable arrogance. Candace, elegant and poised, a woman who had mastered the art of polite condescension. Emily, eyes fixed on her phone, already mentally halfway to your Mark, preoccupied with a game on his tablet, completely detached. None of them saw the storm brewing behind my calm exterior. They only saw what they wanted to see, an old woman defeated. I turned. I didn't say a word. No parting shot, no dramatic exit line. Silence, I've learned, can be the loudest statement of all. It leaves space for reflection, for doubt, for the seeds of realization to be planted. They wouldn't know it then, but my silence was about to scream. It was the silence of a door closing. Not on a relationship, but on a lifetime of playing small. As I walked towards the heavy oak front door, I could feel their eyes on my back, probably exchanging amused glances. I imagined them chuckling, perhaps Blake making a comment like, "Well, that's that. Finally, some peace." They likely thought I was going to my room to cry, to wallow in self-pity, to accept my newly defined role as the bereaved and helpless widow. That's what they expected, and that's precisely why they were about to be blindsided. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside. It was sharp and clean, the kind of light Henry used to say was perfect for yard work. It invigorated me, clearing my head. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, I imagined their laughter, their self-congratulatory whispers echoing within those expensive walls. They had no idea that the click of that lock wasn't keeping me out. It was sealing them in. This moment, this quiet departure, was the culmination of months of planning, years of observation. You see, while Henry was the charismatic face of our empire, I was the unseen architect. I was the one poring over balance sheets late into the night, diversifying investments, ensuring every legal document was impeccable. I had foresight. I had contingency plans. And after Henry's passing, I knew the vultures would circle. It's a sad truth that sometimes the ones you love most are the ones waiting to pick apart your life's work. My own story, unfortunately, isn't unique in this regard. There are countless individuals, especially older people, who find themselves in similar positions where their contributions are overlooked and their financial affairs are assumed to be too complex for them to manage. Consider the case of a dear friend of mine, Agnes. For years, she managed her family's entire portfolio, from investments to taxes, while her husband was the public face of their success. When he passed, her adult children immediately tried to take over, citing her age as a reason for her incompetence. They even went so far as to suggest she might be suffering from cognitive decline. It took a protracted legal battle for Agnes to prove her mental acuity and her rightful control over assets she had largely built herself. The emotional toll was immense. Agnes's story served as a stark warning. I vowed I wouldn't let that happen to me. So, while my family was busy dismissing me, I was busy working. Not with anger, but with precision. I had already initiated the necessary legal procedures, calmly and methodically. Every asset, every property, every last penny that had been jointly held or even solely owned by Henry, but contributed to by my efforts, was systematically transferred. It wasn't about malice. It was about ensuring my own security and, frankly, delivering a much-needed lesson. I drove home that night not to a house filled with emptiness, but to a quiet sanctuary where I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I didn't feel victorious or smug. I felt settled. It's a profound difference. Victory implies a battle won against an enemy. Settled implies finding peace within yourself, having honored your own worth. The next morning dawned, sharp and clean, just as Henry would have liked. For my family, it started like any other day. Blake would wake up in his sprawling master bedroom, Candace would enjoy her gourmet coffee, and the kids would prepare for their expensive private school. They would call their financial advisors, their lawyers, their real estate agents, expecting everything to be as it always was. But it wouldn't be. The first domino would fall subtly: a frozen credit card, an email notification about an unusual activity on an account that suddenly refused access, a call to the bank that went straight to a bewildered customer service representative who could only repeat, "Madam, the account is not accessible to you. It's listed under a different legal entity." Then came the home. Oh, the beautiful, grandiose home that Blake and Candace were so proud of, the one Henry and I had helped secure. That morning, when Blake tried to leave for work, he would find the electronic lock on his front door unresponsive. A small, polite note from an unfamiliar law firm would be taped to the glass. It would state very clearly that as of 6 a.m. that morning, the property at this address was no longer under his legal purview. It belonged solely and unequivocally to Eleanor Whitmore. The shock, the disbelief, the dawning horror, I could almost feel it from miles away. It wasn't about inflicting pain for pain's sake. It was about consequence. It was about illustrating a fundamental truth that they had conveniently forgotten, that everything they had was built on a foundation they had systematically dismantled, brick by brick, with their words and their actions. And the foundation was me. By the time the sun had fully risen, their accounts would be frozen, their homes would be locked, and everything they thought was theirs would legally, indisputably belong to me. My silent exodus from their dinner table wasn't an act of weakness. It was the quiet, powerful closing of a chapter and the dawn of a new one where just the widow was finally ready to take back her crown. What happened next would be a reckoning, a moment of truth where they would finally see the woman they had so carelessly dismissed. And the lesson? Sometimes the most powerful statements are made not with words, but with actions that speak volumes. The morning after my quiet departure dawned with an almost cruel serenity. The sun, a cheerful, unaware orb, began its slow ascent, casting golden light across the landscape. For me, that light felt like a fresh beginning, a calm before the storm. For my family, it would be the first painful rays exposing their carefully constructed illusions. I imagined the scene unfolding at Blake's opulent home, the smell of Candace's expensive gourmet coffee, the clatter of silverware, the usual morning routine. They would expect a tranquil day, probably relieved that the widow had finally retreated. They had no idea that their tranquil morning was about to shatter into a million pieces. The first phone call probably came around 8 a.m. Perhaps it was Blake, attempting to access his investment accounts, the ones he so casually boasted about during dinner. The automated voice on the other end, calm and robotic, would deliver the first blow. Account access denied. This account has been flagged for unusual activity, or more bluntly, this account is currently frozen. I could almost hear his frustrated sigh, the initial assumption of a technical glitch. He'd try again and again. Then he'd probably call his bank, demanding answers, his voice rising in irritation. The customer service representative, following strict protocols, would politely but firmly explain, "Sir, according to our records, this account is no longer under your authorized access. It has been transferred to a different legal entity." Then would come Candace's turn. Perhaps she was trying to pay for her online shopping or access funds for one of her endless social engagements. The same disheartening message, the same polite refusal. The disbelief would quickly morph into panic. They would start talking to each other, their voices escalating from annoyance to genuine alarm. "What's going on? My card isn't working. They say the account has been transferred." The real gut punch, though, would be the house, the mansion that was their pride and joy, the symbol of their perceived success. Blake, perhaps late for a morning meeting, would attempt to open the electronic lock. The usual soft click would be replaced by a dead silence. He'd try again and again, his brow furrowed with confusion. And then he would see it. A crisp, formal notice taped meticulously to the gleaming glass of the front door. It would be from a law firm, one they didn't recognize. The language would be precise, unambiguous. Notice of ownership transfer. As of date/time, this property at Eleanor Whitmore, any unauthorized entry will be considered trespassing. The shock, the raw, visceral disbelief. I pictured Blake's jaw dropping, Candace's elegant hands flying to her mouth. Their faces, once so smug, would crumple in a mix of confusion, anger, and utter helplessness. Their world, built on assumptions and entitlement, was crumbling around them. This isn't just a dramatic turn in a story, it's a reflection of a harsh reality that some individuals face. Many, especially those who rely heavily on others for financial management or inheritance, operate under the assumption that certain assets are inherently theirs. Without understanding the intricate legal frameworks that govern ownership, consider the numerous cases where families are torn apart by property disputes, where children, feeling entitled, attempt to usurp assets that were meticulously managed by a surviving parent. Take the case of the fictional Smith family, for instance. Mrs. Smith, a quiet homemaker, had inherited a significant portfolio from her parents and over decades meticulously managed it, investing wisely and growing it exponentially. Her adult children, however, saw their father as the primary breadwinner and assumed all wealth originated from him. When he passed, they immediately began discussing how to distribute their inheritance, completely overlooking their mother's direct ownership and diligent management. They were shocked when they discovered that a large portion of the family's liquid assets was solely under her name, not their father's, and she had every right to control it as she saw fit. This kind of disconnect between perception and legal reality is surprisingly common. By noon, the phone calls would have started pouring into my humble home, not from Blake or Candace directly, not yet, but from lawyers, frantic financial advisors, and perhaps even some distant relatives who had heard whispers of the unusual situation. Each call a confirmation that my carefully laid plans were unfolding precisely as intended. I answered each call calmly, directing them to the appropriate legal channels, reiterating the facts without emotion. Yes, the assets are now solely under my name. Yes, the property transfer was legitimate and completed months ago. All legal documentation is in order. My voice was steady, unwavering, no hint of triumph, no trace of malice, just the quiet assurance of someone who had done their homework. Then the inevitable call from Blake. His voice was a volatile mix of anger, confusion, and betrayal. "Mother, what have you done? What is this nonsense? Our accounts are frozen. Our house is locked. What in God's name are you playing at?" And listened, letting him vent, letting the full weight of their self-inflicted crisis sink in. When he finally paused, breathless with rage, I spoke, my voice calm, almost detached. "Blake, dear, I haven't done anything. I simply asserted what was always legally mine. You see, while you were busy dismissing me as just the widow, I was busy securing the future I built. My future," he spluttered. But everything, that was our inheritance, our life." "No, Blake," I corrected him gently. "That was my life's work, my contributions, my decisions, my sacrifices. You were merely beneficiaries of my hard work. And now, as the legal owner, I have simply made the necessary adjustments. You are welcome to retrieve your personal belongings from the house, of course, after proper arrangements are made with my legal team. And the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. He had nothing to say, no argument to counter the legal facts, no emotional plea that could override the paper trail I had meticulously laid. This moment, this complete reversal of power, wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. It was about proving a point that words alone could not convey. It's a critical lesson many of us learn, often too late. Actions speak louder than words, and legal actions can speak the loudest of all. When verbal boundaries are ignored, sometimes the universe, or in this case, a determined widow, has to step in and draw those lines with undeniable consequences. Later that day, they would arrive at my house, not with humility, but with a mixture of disbelief and wounded pride. Blake, Candace, Emily, and Mark, they stood on my porch, their faces a canvas of emotions. The arrogance was gone, replaced by desperation. They expected an explanation, a tearful breakdown, an opportunity for them to persuade me to undo what I had done. They were about to be disappointed. As I opened the door, their eyes pleaded, demanded, questioned, but I was done explaining. I was done making myself small. This was the moment for the truth to be laid bare, not through arguments or pleas, but through an undeniable declaration of ownership. The game was over, and the widow was about to deliver the final, irrevocable checkmate. I opened the door to my family. There they stood on my modest porch, a tableau of disbelief and burgeoning panic. Blake, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and confusion. Candace, her usual polished demeanor cracking, eyes wide with a desperate, questioning stare. Emily and Mark, usually so absorbed in their own worlds, now looked utterly bewildered, clinging to their parents' sides as if seeking an explanation for this sudden, terrifying shift in their reality. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with accusations already forming on their lips. They expected me to be distraught, to be emotional, to be the widow they had so easily defined. But I was none of those things. I was calm. I was resolute. And that, I could tell, unsettled them more than any outbursts ever could have. I stepped aside, gesturing them in, not with an invitation, but with a silent command. They hesitated, clearly expecting a confrontation on the porch, a chance to corner me. But this wasn't going to be on their terms. They reluctantly shuffled inside, their designer shoes scuffing slightly on my worn wooden floor, a stark contrast to the gleaming marble they were used to. I led them to my small living room, a space filled with memories, with books, with the quiet comfort of a life well lived. They stood awkwardly, scanning the familiar yet suddenly alien surroundings. Blake seemed about to explode, but I raised a hand, a gesture he'd seen countless times during his childhood, a gesture that used to command instant obedience. He paused, a flicker of old habit, before his anger flared again. "There is no game, Blake," I began, my voice even, calm, cutting through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "And there is no meaning beyond what is plainly before you. The accounts are frozen because I froze them. The house is locked because I locked it. And everything you thought was yours is, in fact, legally mine." The words landed like heavy stones in a quiet pool. Candace gasped, a sharp, choked sound. Emily's jaw dropped. Mark, for once, looked up from his phone, his eyes wide. Blake's face contorted, a mixture of disbelief and fury. "That's impossible," he roared. "That would never—" "Henry and I built this," I interrupted, my voice still steady but with an undeniable edge. "Every piece of it, every penny, every property, every investment. We worked for it, sacrificed for it. And yes, Henry was the public face, the one who closed the big deals, but I was the one who managed every single cent. I was the one who invested, who diversified, who navigated every market downturn. I was the one who kept it all together." This is where the narrative of many families breaks down. There's often an unspoken, outdated assumption that the man of the house is solely responsible for financial success, especially in older generations. The contributions of the woman behind the man, often the diligent bookkeeper, the shrewd investor, the meticulous budgeter, the supportive partner who enabled the primary breadwinner, are frequently overlooked or simply not recognized. Consider the true story of a couple. Let's call them the Johnsons. Mr. Johnson was a charismatic entrepreneur, known for his bold ventures. Everyone assumed he was the financial genius, but it was Mrs. Johnson, a quiet, meticulous woman who managed every invoice, every payment, every investment record. She foresaw market shifts, diversified their portfolio when he was too focused on his latest big deal, and quietly saved every extra penny. When he passed, the family was shocked to find that the vast majority of their liquid assets were not in his name, but in hers, because she had consistently made the most prudent and forward-thinking financial decisions. Her children initially reacted with suspicion, much like Blake, until they saw the undeniable paper trail she had diligently maintained. You talk about inheritance, Blake, I continued, my gaze fixed on him, but you've forgotten something fundamental. An inheritance is given. What I've done is secured what is already rightfully mine. When Henry passed, all assets, meticulously and legally, were transferred to my sole ownership. This was not a secret. It was a carefully planned legal process, something I initiated months ago when it became clear that some members of this family had forgotten the meaning of respect. His face went white. Candace covered her mouth, her eyes darting between me and Blake. They hadn't just dismissed me. They had underestimated my intelligence, my foresight, and my resolve. They had assumed that a woman of 68, a widow, would simply wither away, leaving her legacy to be carved up and distributed by those who felt entitled to it. You told me I was just the widow, I repeated, my voice rising slightly, the calm replaced by a powerful conviction, that I should sit quietly. But I wasn't quiet when I built this family. I wasn't quiet when I kept it alive through thick and thin, and I sure as hell won't be quiet now that I've taken back what's mine. The silence in the room was absolute, heavier than any I had ever known. They stood frozen, unable to respond, unable to argue with the cold, hard facts. They had built their entire reality on a foundation of my quiet contributions, and now that foundation was asserting its power. This table, I swept my hand across the old, sturdy wooden table in my living room, the one where I had helped Blake with his homework, where Henry and I had planned our future. This room, this house, the accounts you can no longer access, the properties you thought were yours. I own them, legally, emotionally, structurally. I paused, letting the weight of each word sink in. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I pointed towards the door. You are guests here, and remember that. This moment, this complete reversal of their expectations was not about inflicting pain for the sake of it. It was about consequence. It was about teaching a lesson that they had so desperately needed to learn. It's a powerful reminder that respect is earned, not given, and entitlement, if left unchecked, can lead to devastating loss. When you consistently devalue someone's contributions, when you silence their voice and dismiss their agency, you risk losing everything they bring to the table. And in my case, they lost the table itself. I saw the flicker of something in Blake's eyes. Not just anger, but a nascent understanding, perhaps even a hint of fear. They were finally seeing me not as the widow, but as Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who had built, preserved, and now reclaimed. I stood up without waiting for a response, without needing further explanation. My voice had already delivered the final, undeniable truth. As I walked towards the front door to see them out, I turned back one last time. My eyes met theirs, and in that moment, I spoke the words that would resonate far beyond that day, words that were not just for them, but for anyone who has ever felt diminished or overlooked. You don't have to like me, I said, my voice softer now, but no less powerful. You just have to understand that I'm done making myself small so you can feel big. And then I opened the door, not to banish them, but to close a chapter. I left them standing there, facing the cold, hard reality of their own making. I wasn't angry. I wasn't smug. I was simply finished. And with that, a profound sense of peace settled over me, a feeling I hadn't known in years. What came next wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was about rebuilding, not because someone gave me permission, but because I finally gave it to myself. The click of my front door closing behind my bewildered family was the softest sound I had heard in years. It wasn't the slamming of a door in anger, but the gentle closing of a chapter that had long outlived its purpose. The silence that followed was not empty, but filled with the promise of newfound freedom. I walked back into my living room, the space that had just witnessed a dramatic confrontation, and found it suddenly lighter, infused with a serenity I hadn't known in decades. I settled back into my favorite armchair, the worn fabric feeling like a comforting embrace. My shoulders, which had carried the invisible weight of responsibility and unspoken resentment for so long, finally relaxed. I felt a profound sense of release, a quiet joy that transcended the drama of the past few hours. This wasn't about winning. It was about finally, truly being free. This feeling of genuine freedom is something many people long for, especially as they enter their later years. It's the freedom to define your own existence, to pursue your own happiness, unburdened by external expectations or the sometimes toxic dynamics of family. For so much of my life, my identity had been interwoven with being Henry's wife, Blake's mother, the family's anchor. While I loved those roles, they had, over time, become shackles, limiting my own growth and silencing my voice. Now, the canvas was blank, and the brush was in my hand. This journey of self-reclamation isn't unique to me. I've heard countless stories, seen it in the lives of other senior citizens who, after decades of living for others, suddenly find themselves with an opportunity to live for themselves. Take Margaret, a woman in her late 70s who, after her husband passed, realized she had always suppressed her lifelong dream of becoming a painter. Her children discouraged it, saying it was too late or impractical. But Margaret, inspired by a friend's quiet defiance, bought herself an easel and began taking classes. Her painting, simple at first, blossomed into vibrant expressions of her inner world. She found a community of fellow artists, a new purpose, and a joy she never knew was possible. Her children eventually came around, not because they approved, but because they saw her newfound radiance. Margaret's story is a testament to the fact that age is not a barrier to self-discovery, but often a catalyst. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation with my family was, as expected, a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and heated phone calls, none of which I directly engaged in. My legal team handled the details firmly and professionally. There were threats, appeals, even pleas for family unity, but they all crashed against the solid wall of undeniable facts and meticulously prepared documentation. It became clear very quickly that there was no loophole, no recourse. Everything was legally mine. And as the storm raged around them, I remained in my calm eye. I spent my days reading, listening to classical music, something I'd neglected for far too long. I rediscovered the joy of simple pleasures. A perfectly brewed cup of tea in the morning, the warmth of the sun on my face, the scent of freshly cut grass. These were the moments Henry and I had often dreamed of, the moments we had postponed in our relentless pursuit of more. No, they were my reality. The decision to reclaim my assets wasn't about depriving my family of everything. It was about teaching them a profound lesson about value, respect, and consequence. I established trust for Emily and Mark, ensuring they would have access to funds for their education and a modest start to their adult lives, but under strict conditions that emphasized financial responsibility and personal accountability. Blake and Candace, however, would have to rebuild their lives from scratch, a harsh but necessary reality check. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to allow them to face the consequences of their own action. This act of controlled redirection, rather than complete deprivation, reflects a deeper wisdom. It demonstrates that reclaiming power isn't about blind vengeance, but about strategic justice. It's about ensuring future generations understand the value of hard work and respect, rather than fostering an environment of entitlement. It's a nuanced approach that many estate planners and family therapists often advise: set clear boundaries and ensure that generosity is tied to accountability, not just expectation. As the weeks turned into months, the frantic calls from my family dwindled. There was no apology, no genuine reflection, at least not that I could discern, and that was okay. I wasn't waiting for their approval or their understanding. I was moving forward. My rebuilding wasn't just about my finances or my physical space, it was about rebuilding my spirit. I started volunteering at the local library, a place that had always been my sanctuary. I joined a book club, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. I even started taking lessons in watercolor painting, a childhood dream I'd long suppressed. My art, though simple, was a vibrant expression of the life I was now creating for myself. I discovered a new community, friends who saw me for who I was, not for what I could provide, but for who I was. They were curious about my experiences. They listened to my stories and they valued my wisdom. It was a refreshing change from the dismissive silence I had grown accustomed to. These connections, built on mutual respect and genuine interest, nourished my soul in ways that material wealth never could. This journey taught me an invaluable lesson. Your true wealth lies not in what you possess, but in who you are, the wisdom you accumulate, and the peace you cultivate within yourself. No one can ever take that away from you. They can freeze accounts, lock doors, and strip titles, but they can never diminish the inherent value of your spirit. So, what are the lasting takeaways from Elena's story? For those who feel overlooked or undervalued, especially as you age, never underestimate your own power, your knowledge, and your contributions. Your voice matters. Your agency is yours to claim. Don't be afraid to set boundaries, even with family, when your well-being and self-respect are at stake. Sometimes the most powerful act of self-love is walking away from what no longer serves you, even if it feels terrifying. Your value doesn't diminish with age, it only deepens. Younger generations, or anyone in a position to inherit or benefit from another's efforts, cultivate profound respect for those who came before you. Understand the true source of your opportunities and privileges. Acknowledge the invisible labor, the silent sacrifices, and the hidden wisdom that often forms the very foundation of your life. Don't mistake quietness for weakness or a lack of outward assertiveness for a lack of capability. True wealth is not just about money, it's about the legacy of love, hard work, and integrity passed down through generations. Treat that legacy and its creators with the reverence they deserve. For everyone, life is an ongoing process of growth and adaptation. It's never too late to redefine your purpose, to pursue your passions, and to build a life that truly brings you joy and peace. Self-reclamation is a powerful journey, one that can lead to profound and lasting happiness. I am Eleanor Whitmore. I am 68 years old. I am a woman who built, endured, reclaimed, and is now rebuilding. My story is not just about what they lost. It is about what I finally found. I found my strength, my voice, and a peace that truly surpasses all understanding. And as I look out at the world, I realize that the most beautiful part of life is the constant possibility of a new beginning, a blank canvas waiting for your brush. Thank you for walking this journey with me.